The Galactic Council had ruled for eons with iron authority, using fear and domination to keep the scattered species of the universe under their control. At the heart of their power was the Skarzul, an ancient beast that had grown infamous across the galaxy for its insatiable hunger and unmatched ferocity. Many species had tried to defeat it, but none had succeeded. For generations, the Skarzul had been fed the captured and the condemned, those who defied the Council's will or failed to serve their masters. It was said that the beast had consumed more lives than the stars in the galaxy, its stomach a graveyard of the damned. For the first time in centuries, the beast was to be fed something new, a human child. Earth, a relatively recent addition to the galactic fold, had not yet found its place among the more advanced civilizations. Though technologically capable, humanity was still considered weak by many of the elder species. Earth's initial attempts at diplomacy had gone poorly, its leaders failing to adhere to the complex and often brutal customs of the wider galaxy. Tensions had escalated between humans and the Council, leading to this very moment, an ultimatum of sorts. By sacrificing one of their own, the Council hoped to not only humiliate the humans, but also send a message to other species that might consider defiance. Ava, the child chosen for this grim purpose, had been abducted from her home. One moment she had been playing in her small suburban yard, the warmth of the Earth's sun on her skin, and the next she was surrounded by cold, sterile metal walls. The aliens who had taken her were silent and efficient, like shadows moving through space. She had screamed for her mother, her father, but there was no response, only the muffled hum of the ship as it sped through the stars. Now, standing in the feeding arena on the capital world of Toraskal, Ava felt the weight of 1,000 eyes bearing down on her. The arena was vast, its walls stretching so high they seemed to touch the clouds. Around the circular pit sat the galaxy's elite, alien dignitaries from across the stars, representatives of species both familiar and strange. Some had faces like insects, others with luminous skin that shifted colors as they watched. The air buzzed with anticipation, the audience eager for the spectacle promised by the Council. Ava's small form stood out in stark contrast to the grandiosity of the arena. She was a fragile-looking child with wide, frightened blue eyes and matted blonde hair that clung to her face. She wore the simple clothes of a human child, a pair of jeans and a t-shirt stained from the days she had spent in captivity. In her arms she clutched a small stuffed bear, the only remnant of home she had left. It was torn and dirty now, but Ava held on to it with all her strength. It was her last link to the life that had been so cruelly taken from her. She didn't understand what was happening, only that she was alone and scared. The alien handlers had said nothing to her during her capture, and the strange creatures who prodded her forward now didn't speak her language. They simply gestured with sharp movements, their tall, spindly forms looming over her like nightmares made real. Ava stumbled into the middle of the pit, her legs shaking beneath her. The ground beneath her feet felt cold and unforgiving, a stark contrast to the familiar comforts of home. She could hear the distant murmur of the crowd, their strange alien voices like the buzzing of insects. She wasn't sure if they were cheering or jeering, but she knew they were waiting for something. Something terrible. At the far end of the arena, a massive iron gate groaned as it began to rise. The sound echoed through the space, causing the hairs on the back of Ava's neck to stand on end. From the darkness beyond the gate, a deep growl rumbled, a sound so primal and filled with hunger that it sent a wave of terror crashing over her. The Skarzul, the beast of legend, was emerging. As the gate lifted, the first thing Ava saw was its eyes. They glowed an eerie crimson, like twin orbs of molten lava in the shadows. The rest of the creature followed, a massive, hulking form that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its body was covered in thick, dark scales that shimmered with a faint, otherworldly glow, each one as hard as the toughest metal. Its maw was wide, filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth, capable of tearing through flesh and bone with ease. The creature's breath filled the air with a hot, acrid stench, and its growl reverberated through the arena like distant thunder. The crowd erupted in cheers at the sight of the Skarzul, their voices rising in a crescendo of excitement. To them, this was nothing more than entertainment, a show of dominance, a reminder of the Council's power. They had seen the Skarzul tear through warriors and criminals alike, devouring them without hesitation. But this time was different. This time, the prey was a human child, and they relished the shock value of the moment. Ava stood frozen in the middle of the pit, her heart pounding in her chest. Her small frame seemed impossibly fragile against the backdrop of the arena, dwarfed by the enormity of the beast that was now stalking toward her. She couldn't move, couldn't think. Fear had gripped her so tightly that all she could do was stare as the Skarzul drew closer. The beast's eyes locked onto her, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Ava could feel the weight of its gaze, a predatory hunger that sent shivers down her spine. She knew that no one was coming to save her, that she was utterly alone in this moment. Her fingers tightened around the stuffed bear in her arms, as if hoping that the small toy could somehow protect her from the horrors that awaited. The ground trembled with each step the Skarzul took, its massive claws digging into the earth as it closed the distance between them. Its growl deepened, a sound so low and menacing that it seemed to vibrate through Ava's very bones. The crowd's cheers grew louder, a deafening roar that drowned out everything else. They were eager for blood, for carnage, and they were about to get it. But just as the Skarzul lunged forward, its maw wide open to swallow Ava whole, something unexpected happened. The beast paused. The crowd's cheers faltered, replaced by confused murmurs as the Skarzul hesitated. It stood over the child, its jaws mere inches from her small body, but instead of devouring her, it sniffed the air. Its eyes, once filled with predatory hunger, now seemed curious, almost gentle. Ava, trembling with fear, took a small step back, her eyes wide as she looked up at the creature. She didn't understand what was happening, but something inside her told her not to run. She stood still, clutching her stuffed bear as the Skarzul lowered its massive head, sniffing her with a strange curiosity. The entire arena fell silent. The crowd, the council, the handlers, everyone watched in stunned silence as the Skarzul, the most feared creature in the galaxy, sat down in front of the human child. It lowered its head to the ground, its glowing eyes softening as it nuzzled her gently, like a mother comforting her young. Ava blinked, her heart still racing. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly reached out her hand and placed it on the beast's snout. Its scales were warm to the touch, and as her fingers brushed against them, she felt a strange connection, a pulse of energy that seemed to flow between them. The crowd erupted into chaos. Alien dignitaries stood from their seats, shouting in confusion and anger. The council members were on their feet, demanding explanations from the beast's handlers, but none could offer an answer. No one had ever seen the Skarzul behave this way before. Down in the pit, Ava stood with her hand on the beast's snout, her fear slowly fading. She didn't understand what was happening, but in that moment she felt safe, safer than she had since she'd been taken from her home. The Skarzul curled protectively around the girl, shielding her from the frenzied audience. It let out a low, rumbling growl, not of hunger, but of warning. And in that moment, the entire galaxy began to realize that something far more extraordinary was at play. Chapter 2. The Beast Hesitates. The entire arena held its collective breath. The sight of the Skarzul, a creature that had devoured entire armies without a second thought, sitting docile before a human child, was something no one could have predicted. The spectators, representatives from dozens of star systems, galactic elites, and high-ranking military officers, had all come expecting a display of carnage. They had expected the human child to be torn apart within seconds, a testament to the Galactic Council's power and a reminder of humanity's weakness. But instead, they were witnessing something beyond comprehension. The Skarzul, the very symbol of fear and destruction, had not only hesitated but had lowered itself before the child. Ava, the small human girl, now stood with her hand resting gently on the beast's snout. The image was surreal. This fragile human, barely more than a toddler, seemed to have tamed the deadliest creature in the galaxy with nothing more than her presence. Confusion rippled through the crowd. What had just happened? Whispers spread like wildfire as dignitaries leaned in toward one another, asking questions no one could answer. The Galactic Council, seated high in their private box, were no less bewildered. Their faces, usually expressionless masks of cold authority, now reflected a mixture of shock and concern. Chancellor Vac, the head of the council, clenched his fists in silent fury. His golden skin glimmered under the arena lights as his elongated, serpentine eyes narrowed, flicking back and forth between the Skarzul and the child below. "This is impossible," he hissed through gritted teeth. "The beast has never failed to carry out an execution. What is this human child doing?" Beside him, General Thar, a towering figure from the warlike Ursay species, rumbled deep in his chest, his black-furred hand resting on the hilt of his ceremonial blade. "We should kill the beast. This is a disgrace to the Council's authority." But Chancellor Vac shook his head. "No, this is not the time for rash decisions. We must understand what has happened first." His voice was cold, calculating. "The Skarzul is not just any beast. It is bound to us by more than just chains. If it has faltered, something has interfered. Something deeper." The arena's noise began to swell once again, no longer the excited cheers of bloodthirsty spectators, but the panicked murmurs of confusion. The Skarzul's handlers, a group of highly trained beastmasters, stood frozen at the edge of the arena, their faces masks of disbelief. They had raised the creature since it was but a hatchling, and they knew its every behavior. Never in the history of the Skarzul had it failed to obey its hunger, to obey the will of the council. "What is it doing?" One of the handlers whispered, his voice trembling. "Why hasn't it devoured the child? Could the human be controlling it?" Another asked, her green-tinted skin paling as she looked at her fellow handlers. "Impossible." The leader of the handlers, a grizzled alien with deep-set eyes and a scar running down his cheek, barked. "No creature can control the Skarzul. It is a force of nature, bred for destruction and conquest." Down in the pit, Ava remained still, her heart still racing from the terror she had felt moments before. She was barely aware of the chaos unfolding around her. All she knew was that the massive beast before her, which had been poised to tear her apart, had suddenly become calm. The fear that had gripped her was slowly giving way to a strange sense of connection, a warmth that radiated from the Skarzul and into her hand, as if something deep inside the creature recognized her. She could feel its breath, hot and heavy as it rumbled softly, almost like a giant cat purring. Ava didn't know why, but she wasn't afraid anymore. The beast's enormous eyes were locked on hers, and in those glowing orbs she didn't see hunger or malice. She saw understanding. It was as if the Skarzul was communicating with her, not through words, but through something deeper, an unspoken bond. Ava didn't understand how, but she felt like the Skarzul was trying to tell her something. She blinked, confused, but somehow reassured. With her free hand, she wiped her tears away and took a deep breath. The stuffed bear in her arms, once a symbol of her vulnerability, now felt like a talisman of protection. For a moment, she thought she heard something, a voice, faint but unmistakable. It was not a voice that came from any of the aliens in the arena. No, it was something else, something that seemed to echo from within her own mind. The voice was soft, gentle, and comforting. "Don't be afraid, little one. You are not alone." Ava blinked in surprise. She glanced around, but no one else seemed to hear it. Was it the beast? Was it speaking to her? The thought was absurd, but there was no other explanation. The Skarzul, this monstrous creature, seemed to be communicating with her, and only her. The beast rumbled again, and this time Ava felt the vibrations in her bones. Slowly it curled its massive body around her, its scaly form forming a protective barrier between her and the rest of the arena. The crowd gasped, unsure of what was happening. The Skarzul, the galaxy's greatest predator, was now shielding the human child as if she were its own. Above, the council chamber was in uproar. Chancellor Vac slammed his fist onto the arm of his chair, the metallic sound reverberating through the observation deck. "This is unacceptable. The beast has been compromised. We cannot allow this spectacle to continue." General Thar growled, his eyes glowing with barely restrained fury. "Then let me put an end to it, Chancellor. One strike, and the beast will be no more." But the Chancellor raised a hand to silence the general. "No, we will not act in haste. Something strange is at play here, something unprecedented. We must understand what has caused this change in the Skarzul before we take action." Below in the pit, Ava sat on the ground, her small body dwarfed by the Skarzul's massive form. She could hear the growing unrest of the crowd, but it felt distant, as if she were in a bubble of silence with the creature. She looked up at the Scar Jewel, its eyes now gentle, almost protective. It was a strange feeling, being at the mercy of a beast, and yet feeling safer than she had since she had been taken from her home. Suddenly, Ava heard the voice again, clearer this time. "You have awakened something within me, little one. A connection, ancient, forgotten. I was not always this way. You are not as they believe. You are more." Ava didn't know what the voice meant, but she felt it, deep inside her, a pulse of energy that seemed to resonate with the beast. It was as if something long dormant within her had been stirred, and the Skarzul had recognized it. As the tension in the arena reached a fever pitch, Ava's eyes began to glow faintly, a soft blue light that pulsed in time with the beast's breathing. The Skarzul rumbled again, and this time the sound was different, stronger, more deliberate. The crowd fell silent once more, their confusion turning to fear as they watched the glowing light emanate from the human child. In the observation deck, Chancellor Vac leaned forward, his serpentine eyes narrowing as he watched the scene unfold. "What is this?" he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. The Skarzul, once a creature of mindless destruction, had now become something far more dangerous, a par-otector. And at the heart of it all was a human child, whose power was only just beginning to awaken. Chapter 3. Unveiling Power Days passed, and the galaxy buzzed with the shock of what had transpired in the arena. The Skarzul, the Council's most feared weapon, had not only spared the life of a human child, but had formed some kind of bond with her. It was an event that no one could explain, and the Council's most brilliant minds were at a loss to decipher the strange phenomenon. Chancellor Vac ordered the girl, Ava, to be taken to a secure facility for observation. The Council needed answers, and they were determined to find them. Ava was kept in a heavily fortified chamber beneath the capital city of Toraskal. Armed guards patrolled the hallways, and the Council's top scientists conducted tests on her daily. They scanned her brain, measured her vitals, and monitored her every movement, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. To them, she was just a normal human child. Yet, the connection between her and the Skarzul couldn't be denied. The beast, too, had been relocated. It now remained in a heavily reinforced cage deep underground, far away from Ava, though the Council kept it alive for further study. It had become an enigma, something that both fascinated and terrified the galaxy's ruling powers. Inside her cell, Ava was left alone for long stretches of time. She sat on the cold metal floor, clutching her stuffed bear, her mind racing with questions. Why had the Skarzul spared her? Why had it protected her instead of devouring her like all the others? And most of all, what was the strange power she had begun to feel inside her? Every night, Ava dreamed of the beast. In her dreams, she wasn't in the arena anymore. She was standing in a vast, endless field under a sky filled with unfamiliar stars. The Skarzul was always there, standing beside her, watching her with its glowing red eyes. But in her dreams, it wasn't a beast of destruction. It was a guide, leading her through strange, alien landscapes. She could feel its thoughts, not in words, but in emotions, curiosity, protectiveness, and something deeper, something ancient. One night, the dream was different. Ava found herself in the same field, but this time the Skarzul stood still, staring at her intently. She reached out her hand, and as she touched its snout, a surge of energy pulsed through her. The sensation was overwhelming, filling her with warmth and light. She felt powerful. When she awoke, Ava could still feel the energy coursing through her veins. She sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time since she had been taken from Earth, she didn't feel scared. She felt connected. The door to her cell slid open with a hiss, and a team of scientists entered, as they did every day. They were led by Dr. Kaldros, a tall, thin alien with pale blue skin and a sharp, analytical gaze. He approached Ava with the same cold detachment he always did, holding a tablet in his hands. "Ava," he said in a voice devoid of emotion, "we will be conducting another series of tests today. Please cooperate." Ava looked up at him, her eyes narrowed. She was tired of the tests, tired of being poked and prodded like some kind of experiment. But today, something was different. She could feel the energy inside her, humming just beneath the surface, waiting to be released. As the scientists prepared their instruments, Ava closed her eyes and focused. She wasn't sure how, but she knew that the power within her was linked to the Scarjoul. It was as if the creature had awakened something inside her, something the council didn't understand. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. The scientists froze, glancing around in confusion. Dr. Kaldros tapped his tablet, frowning as the lights flickered again, this time more intensely. "Ava," he said slowly, his voice tinged with suspicion. "What are you doing?" But Ava didn't answer. Her eyes were closed, and she was concentrating, feeling the energy build inside her. The air in the room seemed to crackle with unseen power, and the floor beneath her vibrated slightly. The scientists took a step back, their instruments forgotten as they watched the child in growing fear. Then, without warning, the lights surged and exploded, plunging the room into darkness. Chapter 4. The dawn of a new era panic erupted throughout the facility as alarms blared and emergency lights flickered to life. The guards stationed outside Ava's cell rushed into action, their weapons drawn, unsure of what had just happened. But Ava remained calm, her heart steady as the power inside her continued to build. The scientists scrambled to regain control of the situation, but Dr. Kaldros stood frozen, his eyes wide with realization. The child was no longer just a subject for study. She was something far more dangerous. Whatever connection she had with the Scarjoul had awakened a force within her that the council had not anticipated. Ava opened her eyes, and they glowed with the same soft blue light that had appeared in the arena. The energy around her was palpable, swirling like an invisible storm. She could feel it coursing through her, a connection not just to the Scarjoul, but to something deeper, something ancient, buried within the very fabric of the galaxy. Dr. Kaldros took a step back, his hands trembling. This is impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the blaring alarms. "No human should be capable of this." Ava stood, her small frame illuminated by the flickering emergency lights. She didn't know exactly what was happening, but she understood one thing. She was no longer helpless. The power inside her was growing, and with it, the knowledge that she could change her fate. With a simple thought, the door to her cell slid open. The guards outside, startled by the sudden movement, raised their weapons, but Ava didn't flinch. She raised her hand, and the energy within her surged outward. The guards froze in place, their weapons falling to the ground as they stood paralyzed, unable to move. Ava stepped out of her cell, her eyes still glowing with power. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she had to find the Scarjoul. The connection between them was growing stronger with each passing moment, and she could feel the beast calling to her, guiding her. As she made her way through the facility, more guards appeared, but none dared to approach her. The power radiating from her was undeniable, a force that none of them had ever seen before. They watched in awe and fear as the small human child walked past them, unchallenged. In the depths of the facility, the Scarjoul stirred. It too could feel the growing power within Ava, and it responded in kind. The creature let out a low, rumbling growl as it broke free from its reinforced cage, tearing through the walls of its prison with ease. The facility shook as the Scarjoul made its way toward Ava, its massive form crashing through barriers that had once held it captive. The two of them were drawn to each other, bound by a power that neither fully understood but could no longer deny. Ava and the Scarjoul met in the heart of the facility, the air crackling with energy as they stood face to face once again. The Galactic Council had underestimated both the beast and the human child. Together, they were something more, something that had the potential to reshape the galaxy. Ava turned her gaze toward the skies above, her heart filled with a newfound sense of purpose. The Council had wanted to use her as a symbol of their power, but they had made a grave mistake. They had given her the power to change everything.